Hello there. We want to welcome you to a very interesting and thought-provoking podcast that my wife did with Dr. David Martin. And I know that it will be controversial. I know that it will raise a lot of questions. I hope that you'll hear us out. And by introduction, I would like to just bring up the fact that we love Dr. David Martin and his dear wife, Kim, very much. We were connected in a very unique way some time ago, and I want to explain that to you because I think it's significant. I think it should be significant to all the listeners as it was to me. But I want to say at the outset that my relationship with Dr. David Martin is based on friendship and honor. It is not based on agreement. I'm sure there are many things that he wouldn't agree with me on. There are probably a number of things I wouldn't agree with him on. But we love each other. And I'm very, very honored to be his friend. I consider him a very close friend. And I thank God for bringing him into my life and into the life of the church. Let me say at the outset that I think that the efficacy of the message of the American church, like everything else in the spiritual arena, should be evaluated based on its fruit. America was founded in Christianity, and at least the Christian religion. Christianity technically would mean that the fruit of a doctrine or a person's life was reflective of Jesus Christ. And so by that measurement, we really haven't had a very clear picture of authentic Christianity in America for the last 250 years. Let me just say this. Jesus said, by your fruit you'll know them. And so Cheryl and I have been pastoring about 40 years. We've known a lot of religious people that weren't particularly loving, weren't particularly kind, weren't particularly gracious, many of them that were arrogant and mean-spirited and didn't remind us at all of Christ, and yet they viewed themselves as spiritual leaders or Christian leaders. And so over the years, we've developed what we call the concept of the Great American Religious Enterprise, which is something that by and large is not reflective of the Spirit of Christ. And we need to be honest with ourselves and ask ourselves why our message and the reflection of our image in society is not very much like that of Jesus Christ. Now, I want to say that God has led both Cheryl and I on a quest to find authenticity in our spiritual experience. And we love the Bible, the Word of God. We certainly are not those that believe that every English translation is accurate and portrays what the heart and mind of God was. We don't feel that way at all. We do feel like that God spoke to men, as it says in the book of Peter. It says that holy men of God were moved by the Holy Spirit. We believe that. We love the Bible. Cheryl and I read it, and our lives have been shaped by that. And yet we haven't thought for a minute that we understand it as we should, that we have a clear perspective of what Christ was teaching or the big picture of the plan of God for the redemption of mankind. And
let me interject. Let me just say this. Jesus spoke to me one time, and he said to me very, very clearly, he said, Cheryl, my first coming was so misunderstood and misrepresented by the people that memorized the first 5 books of the Bible. They memorized it. It was completely misunderstood, and they killed me. So people can know the Bible and be nothing like God, and they can know all about it and be nothing like him, which we see all the time. And that, he said, by our works will be known. By our love, we should be known. And reality is, he said to me, he said, my second coming will be more misrepresented and more misunderstood than my first coming. So we think we know what Jesus' second coming looks like, but he told me very clearly, very personally, he said, my second coming is more misunderstood, more misrepresented. So what we have to do is get outside of we think we know everything. And Christians, of all people, tend to think they have it all down. And I've had God speak to me very clearly. I'm a Christian, clearly. I love Jesus, and nothing will ever change that. I love God, and I hear God. And he didn't stop speaking after Acts was finished. He didn't stop speaking. All through the Old Testament, he spoke audibly to people. He spoke in and out. I mean, he says, and the Lord said, and the angel came, and on and on. Spiritual activity should be the most predominant thing that real Christians live in. We should be seated with him in heavenly places. We should be coming and going out of the other realms. But we have been religionized into a box, and God told me, I will kick the ends and the sides out of that box you are trying to keep me in. So to me, I thank God for David Martin. I thank God for friendships with people that see from another angle and try to help us be a little more honest about what we're saying. And you've said forever, why are we saying this and not seeing this?
Right.
And it's one thing to say, the Bible says this. It's another thing to walk in miracles and signs and wonders, which is what we should do if we walk the way Jesus intended for us to walk. And Dr. David Martin has a lot more miraculous around his life than most people that would be criticizing him.
Right.
So I just want to applaud his heart after God, because he does have a heart after God.
He absolutely does.
And we love him, and I'm very thankful for what I am learning from him.
Yeah, I am as well. So, of course, Cheryl was talking about the Pharisees, who they were the strict theologians of the Old Testament period and the transition into the New Testament. As she mentioned, they crucified the Christ that they purported to be waiting for. And if we bring the concepts that Cheryl was talking about into the here and now, the idea that we know everything and we've got everything sorted out is a million miles from the truth, and we should recognize it based on the fact that the great American religious enterprise has not yielded what we would expect it to yield if it was pure and if we understood things as we should, and as if we had a clear beat, a clear revelation of truth. And so we need to be people who have the integrity to say, okay, same old gets us same old. So we're not living in the power of the gospel of Jesus Christ as it's portrayed in the New Testament. Can we be honest enough to explore why and to ask ourselves, what is it that we're missing? And if we just sit around and gaze at our navels and say, we got this, we understand everything as we should understand it, then there will be no hope for improvement as we move along. And so we want to be people who live in progressive revelation. We believe that the Holy Spirit is revealing more things to the church. Again, not that would be contrary with what God's spoken in the past, but they may very well shine light on what we thought God had spoken in the past and bring us a clearer understanding. I'd like to just share two experiences, one from the life of a prophetic friend of ours, and then tell you about how I met Dr. David Martin. So to begin with, I'd like to talk to you about a friend of ours who is a wonderful man, loves the Lord with all of his heart, pastored for years, is known to be a leader in the realm of prophecy, and his name is Terry Bennett. Love Terry Bennett. Terry Bennett has had a major impact on my life, on Cheryl's life, on our church. Years ago, he called out of the blue and prophesied over me It was very detailed, very specific, and really got my attention. So we invited him out to the Church of Glad Tidings. He's been out here a number of times, and we love him very much. But I was talking to him about some of the deeper spiritual issues that have to do with the end of the age and whatnot. And I noticed when I talked to him, every question I asked, he would reply like this. He would say, well, my current limited understanding of that is this. And then he would explain how he felt about that. And I was asking him questions about the end of the age and the second coming of Christ, the millennial reign, all kinds of things that would be the mysteries of eschatology. I asked him a second question. He responded exactly the same. Well, my current limited understanding of that is, and I thought, that's interesting. He used the same introduction. So I tried it again. And when he said, well, my current limited understanding of that is, I stopped him. And I said, Terry, I've asked you 3 questions. You introduced all 3 of your answers the exact same way. I'd like to know why. He said, well, I had a profound spiritual experience, and it just changed my perspective on how certain I can be about things. And I said, would you share the perspective? He said, well, it's actually embarrassing. I said, I don't mind you being embarrassed. Go ahead, share it. And so he did. He unpacked it. And he said, I was pastoring a church, and I was studying Revelations and the secrets of Revelations and the end of the age as we understand them at this point. Like Cheryl said, the first coming of Christ was filled with surprises. The people who thought they understood it the best are the very people that rejected Christ despite all the many prophecies that he had fulfilled. So now we're talking about his second coming, and as she mentioned, the Holy Spirit said to her, my second coming will be more misunderstood than my first coming. So in that context, Terry is he's preparing to write a book about the second coming of Christ, and he's advertised in his local community that he's going to be teaching a series on the end of the age and the details of eschatology. And he'd worked real hard at it, and Terry is a wonderful man. He loves God's Word. He studies it, and he felt like he had something that he wanted to share regarding the details of how that all was going to come together. So after advertising that and inviting people to come out for his series, he was up the morning that he was going to kick off this teaching series on eschatology, and he had his notes there in a notebook. He was praying over them. Terry is a friend of God, and he's very close to God. He has some wonderful and profound spiritual experiences. And he said that morning, suddenly he was overwhelmed with the presence of God. He looked up, and Christ was standing before him in the room. And he said he smiled at him, and he said, Terry, I'd like to show you something. Touched him. They went into a different realm, and suddenly they were standing on a beach that stretched forever. It was just pure white sand that stretched forever. In both directions and off to one side. And in front of it was just a beautiful crystal sea. So anyway, he was overwhelmed at the amazing amount of this pure white sand that went in 3 directions forever. And he said, the Lord Jesus said, Terry, do you know where we are? And Terry said, no, I don't. He said, we're on the sands of the revelation of truth. And Terry suddenly was overwhelmed with the extent of truth that was yet to be revealed. And he said the Lord reached down, got a small handful of sand, and said, Terry, do you understand what this represents? Terry said, no, Lord, I don't. And the Lord said, this represents all that humankind has ever thought they knew about me. And Terry explained how it was so overwhelming to him. He thought, oh my goodness, you don't even notice it being gone from the volume of sand on the beach. And that's all that humankind has ever thought they knew about the Lord Jesus Christ. And then he said, just when I was feeling completely overwhelmed, he dropped all the sand back onto the beach, and he got one small kernel of sand. And he said it was so small that hardly see it between the Lord's fingers. And said the Lord held it out to him and said, Terry, do you know what this represents? And he said suddenly he was overcome with a sense that he knew what was coming next. But he said, no, Lord, what does that represent? And he said, the Lord just very lovingly said, Terry, this represents all that you think you know about me. And was just still for a minute while that settled in. And then he dropped the kernel back onto the beach, and he said, Terry, don't preach from those notes you've prepared, because you will live long enough to be embarrassed by it if you do. And he said suddenly he was back in his office, and the Lord was gone. But he was left with the overwhelming realization that he knew much, 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 much less than he thought he knew. I think that message has impacted my life as much as any message I've ever heard. Just an overwhelming conviction, not to be arrogant, not to act like you know everything, and not to blame your arrogance on God, because that happens a lot. People think, I know what the Bible says, and so they feel like they have the weight of God behind it, when you may be completely confused about what the Lord is trying to communicate through the Word. And the interpreter of that passage that translated it from Greek or from Hebrew into English, they may not have known what the Lord was trying to say. So I think it behooves us all to be humble, to be kind. Again, our relationships shouldn't be based on all the details we agree on. Our relationships should be based on honor and on love and mutual appreciation. Now, with that said, let me explain to you how I first met Dr. David Martin. We were, at the time, we were in the middle of the COVID con. We had done several seminars to help expose the fraud that was behind the COVID con. And a friend of mine, Christo Hartman, he knew that we were planning another conference. He called me and he said, I have Dr. David Martin's phone number. We had talked before about the magnificent job that David Martin did on the Fauci dossier. And again, in my opinion, David Martin is the horse's mouth on exposing the evil of the COVID con and everything that has been perpetrated on humankind. Of course, he has a brilliant mind, and that's how I met him. I knew of his work. And so I told my friend Christo, I said, yeah, invite him to come. I'd love to have him come. Christo called back, said he didn't want to come. That didn't make sense to me, because most venues were closed at the time. And here was a venue that was welcoming him to come as the keynote speaker. And so I said, Christo, that doesn't make sense. Call him back and ask him again, find out why he doesn't want to come. Anyway, the long and short of it is Christo said, well, he's not comfortable doing speeches in Christian churches and having conferences hosted by Christian pastors. Now, Christo didn't want to tell me that because he wondered if it might offend me. It did not. I feel the same way about most of the expression of Christendom in the West. That's why we've coined this term, the Great American Religious Enterprise. Most of it doesn't remind Cheryl and I of Christ. It reminds us of a religious game show of some kind, or a religious dog and pony show of some sort. And so, again, I'm not trying to be mean-spirited. I'm just trying to say, let's be honest about what we actually have in our experience, not our theology, not our hopes, but in our experience with the Spirit of Christ. And so I resonated with that, and I thought I would probably really get along with this guy if I could just get to know him. And so I told Christo, I said, well, Christo, tell him that the building we're meeting in is a theater, because it was. It was the Embassy Theater. And I said, and tell him I'm an exorcist. And I just felt led to tell Christo that. Christo said, are you serious? I said, yeah, it's one of the many things I do. And so he bounced that off David. David agreed to come. Now, that's how we first met David. He came, spoke the first time. I just loved everything about him. But really, it was a conference setting. I didn't get to know him as well as I would have liked. But he did say when he was leaving, I'd like to come back and bring my wife, Kim, and get to know you better. So we cashed in on that. We brought them both back. And he spoke at another one of our conferences. Again, the theme of the conference was exposing this evil perpetration of this COVID lie and the vaccines and the population being lied to in order to be, many of them, eliminated by a depopulation plan. So that was the focus of that. And we had doctors and scientists and those sort of people. However, the night after he spoke for the first time in that conference, I had a prophetic dream. I've had a number of prophetic dreams over the years. I know when it's a pizza dream or when my brain is defragging and when God is speaking to me in the sleep state. And so I had one of those dreams. I actually woke up prophesying over Dr. David Martin. I woke my wife Cheryl up. She just woke up because of the stirring. And she said, what's going on? I said, I'm going to prophesy over Dr. David Martin tonight in the meeting. She reminded me that he wasn't known for associating in Christian circles, and asked what I was going to prophesy. And I shared with her. I said, I already saw it happen. I know exactly where everybody's going to be standing. It will happen tomorrow night and at the end of the meeting. And I'm going to prophesy that God has specifically chosen Dr. David Martin from his conception. He's had his hand on him, and he has prepared him even through the difficult things in his life. And he's prepared him to be an apostolic voice for the transition of the ages from the church age into the millennial kingdom. And some other details about that, about how God had specifically chosen Kim to be the person who could partner with him, and her love would provide the setting for the fullest expression of what God had called him to. So anyway, the long and short of it is that night I did prophesy over him. He hadn't planned to be at the meeting, but he came in just as the meeting was ended. I prophesied that over him. It wound up being a very, very significant event in his life, and it bonded our hearts together at a very close level. Now, at the same time, it caused religious people that I had known to push away from me and from Cheryl, from the Church of Glad Tidings, begin to say things like, oh, you're compromised, you've embraced the New Age, blah, blah, blah. Just all the ugly things that good people hate about religion. But I just, in that experience, when Cheryl and I were talking that night before I'd prophesied that over him, I said, Cheryl, God brought Saul of Tarsus into the church. He became a main speaker in New Testament revelation. But when he came in, people didn't understand him and kept him at arm's length. And there was a fella that God spoke to, and he said, go prophesy over Saul And Ananias was his name. He said, "No, Lord, he's a bad guy. He's got papers in his hand to deliver us up to be imprisoned or tortured or put to death. We who are Christians." And anyway, but what God said is no. He's not a bad man. He's a special vessel that I have chosen to bring the good news to the Gentiles. And so anyway, I've hung on to that. Now, Dr. David Martin is going to be talking to Cheryl about alchemy. I'll let Cheryl explain how that conversation came about. But I want to say to everybody, try to learn to listen to people. Base your relationships on authentic love, genuine love, and on honor. Honor people for what you can glean from them, and for the truly honorable things that are in their life and character. I want to say this. Dr. David Martin is one of the most honorable men I have ever met. I love him. I respect him very highly. I don't need to agree with him on everything. I certainly have learned a lot from him. He's come to the church a number of times. He's shared a number of messages. I have never heard him share when I didn't gain an insight that was really precious. And so he's going to be talking about one of the most controversial subjects certainly in Christian circles. It's something we need to come to terms with, and I'll just share just a bit more here in a moment. But I want to ask Cheryl to explain how this whole conversation with Dr. David Martin came up, and how God spoke to you about alchemy. Cheryl?
Well, I did in the beginning of the video bring that up already. So I'll just go in and say that years ago, God spoke to me, and he said, really, it was Jesus. And he said to me, he said, "Cheryl, I want you to write a book, and I want it to be called The Ultimate Alchemist." And I thought, I don't know anything about alchemy. I don't know anything about any of this. And he just said it again. He said, "I want you to write a book, and it's about the ultimate alchemist." That's what its title is to be. He showed me the size of the book, showed me the whole thing. And then he said, "And I am the ultimate alchemist. I can transform a heart. I can transform anything." And that's ultimate alchemy. I mean, it's one thing to go bronze to gold, which actually is in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 17. That's one thing. That's another whole thing to change a heart that's ugly, critical, mean. Oh, did I say religious? Religious. Religion is rules without relationship, and people get critical, ugly, snappy, and it's not God's heart. And he judges the heart. And so God also can transform the heart, and that's the ultimate alchemist. And so I just was at breakfast with David Martin, said, "Okay, David, you're one person that I would believe actually understood what alchemy actually means." And he said, "Absolutely, I do." And then he went on and he looked at me and said, "In fact, we're going to do a podcast this morning about that." And I thought, no. I don't want to do a podcast. I know nothing about it. I know God very well. And I know Jesus. I know the Holy Spirit. And I know when they speak to me, I know who it is and I know what they say. And what they said to me was, write this book. So I was asking him about alchemy. Very interesting outcome of that. But I am thankful because God told me also years ago, like I said before, I am going to kick the ins and the sides out of the box that you try to keep me in. Well, I said to God, when he said that, I said, "Me keep you in a box? I don't think I keep you in a box. You should see my friends." And the truth is, most of us think we know. So like Terry Bennett was told, you think you know this much. You think you understand it, but we don't even understand that. And clearly, back in the day, the Pharisees that memorized the first 5 books of the Bible, they ended up being the ones that killed Jesus. Those people that knew all of that hated Jesus and had him killed, put to death. But he burst out of the grave, so that's pretty exciting. Anyway, it's an amazing thing that we have the privilege of knowing not just that there's a Bible, but the God that actually wrote it. So let's go beyond just that and say, how about we interface with God who said he will show us all truth? That's what he said. And the truth of the matter of the fact is, I had an encounter with someone, I think it was an angel. It was definitely an unusual situation in a prison setting where a guard spoke to me for over an hour in the middle of a visitation time. Well, they don't do that. They actually act like, you're terrible. I'm here to keep you in line. And he called me over to the side, and for me, his face was shining. But at the end of everything he said, he looked at me and he said, remember, if you forget everything I just said, remember this. He said, your mind is like a parachute and only open one's work. Forget everything else I said, remember this. Your mind is like a parachute and only open one's work. Well, how many of us truly have open minds to learn more than we yet understand? So I want you to open your heart and your mind and say, Jesus, I'm not going to live in fear-based religion. Religion is rules without relationship. I'm going to live in love because that's who you were, and I'm going to let you lead me and guide me and teach me more and more of your heart. So that's my heart, that we would actually truly represent Christ, who defied all kinds of religious rules and went above and beyond them and reached out to the women, even the women that were prostitutes. He loved the poor and the needy. He loved the broken. And religion makes us judgmental, critical, and harsh. And we've got to break that. Jesus told me years ago, Cheryl, pray against religion. And I thought, I'm the pastor's wife. And he said, yes, and I want you to pray against religion. I want to take you into my heart. So I want you to do that. Begin to pray against rules and say, God, I want relationship with you. Teach me, lead me, guide me into all truth.
Amen. So you're about to hear a dissertation from Dr. David Martin about alchemy. And I want to say this as we move into that and set the foundation for it. Remember, as Mark Twain said, that the only thing that keeps us from learning is thinking we already know. It's very important to understand that. And I hope that we always have a heart for truth, to not look at a conversation based on how can I discount everything somebody's saying, but look at a conversation asking yourself, is there anything that I can learn here? Remember, the Bible says the wise attain unto wise counsel to gain wisdom. And so I'm very, very thankful for sharp minds like Dr. David Martin. By the way, he's a doctor of psychology, and he can go way down the rabbit hole or, off into la la land where most of us tap out. But he's a wonderful guy, has got a brilliant intellect. He has a great understanding of biblical truth, and actually has been involved in Bible translation since the time he was young. But these are a few thoughts I want you to think about. Alchemy, the essential meaning of the word, it's a very, very ancient word, and it means divine transformation. Now, what happens to us all is we try to sort out, well, what would that look like? And I want to encourage you to be very open-minded to that, because by Dr. David Martin's definition, the miracles of Christ were alchemy. That was divine transformation. The most essential example of that is Jesus turned water into wine. He did it through the divine power of God. But he also turned a leper into somebody who was clean by the power of God. All the miracles of Christ were examples of the essence of the divine coming into the human arena and making things better. And so I want you to be at peace with that definition, as alchemy being a fundamental transformation that is a redemptive transformation. It takes things from a fallen state or a lesser state to a better state, a redeemed state. And then I want to also set the stage for you in helping you pass some of your religious hindrances and barriers. Now, years ago, Cheryl and I got involved in deliverance, and supernatural things started happening, things that we didn't understand, but we saw a biblical precedent. And when that started happening, we found that friends that were close to us kind of pushed away because they didn't understand some of the things that were going on. And it was then that God began to show us that in many of the stories of Scripture, there are very fascinating and unusual things, many of which Dr. David Martin is going to talk about, and he's going to do so in the context of alchemy. For instance, we would say Moses threw down his rod, it became a snake, and that's a miracle of God. Dr. David Martin said yes, it's also alchemy. It's also a transformation that comes from the power of the divine, the essence of the divine, what we would call supernatural. But the question, of course, that we face is if supernatural things are common in your life, then they're not really supernatural anymore for you. It might be supernatural for the people around you, but not so much for you because it's a part of your life. Now, it's interesting to me in that context that some of the great leaders and examples of faith in the Scripture were alchemists or wise men. They were even called enchanters. And let me just mention that Joseph, the whole story of the reconciliation of his brothers was based on a magical cup. Now, you might hate that. You might try to get away from it. It is in the Bible. He had a, ready for it, diviner's cup. And that's what the whole tribe of his brothers were called back to Egypt for, is you stole my magic cup. Now, again, I've found out that people that are religious people, they get used to these stories and they never really want to look at the essence of what these things are talking about. Of course, the book of Jasher explains that the way that the brothers finally had revealed to them that Joseph was their long-lost brother was via the diviner's cup. So without getting into more of that, Joseph was called one of the magicians of Egypt. We know that the contest between Moses, it was between him and the magicians of Egypt. And they, by the way, replicated everything he did in the first 4 miracles and first 5 miracles, if you include the staves being turned into snakes. They were magicians. And Moses, obviously, by his demonstration, was chief over them in how the divine power of God came through him to transform the situation. And, of course, we have all of the 10 plagues as examples of that. Now, another one I want to bring up is Daniel. It is stated that Daniel was chief of the magicians and the astrologers of Egypt. Now, that is quite a mouthful, chief of the magicians. But again, it was the power of the divine coming through him to effect miracles and to change things for the better, the power of redemption, the power of miracles. But in the broad definition, it is it's the power of alchemy. It's the being an ancient term for God, the Almighty, and then the word combined with it to mean that it's the power of God that is bringing change. And so I want you to be open as you listen to Dr. David Martin. Remember, he is our dear friend. We love him. We're very, very thankful for him. And we thank him for stretching our minds to irrecoverable proportions. In that sense, he reminds us of another dear friend. Dr. Martin reminds us of David Hogan, who's a missionary friend. In some ways, they're totally different. In other ways, they're very similar. But our friend David Hogan always will talk about miraculous things, and then he'll say, "You're looking at me like I'm out of my mind, but I'm not out of my mind. I'm just out of yours." So Dr. David Martin will be sharing some things that are probably out of your mind. And I want to encourage you to open your heart, listen to him, and let's all together determine not to be critical and mean-spirited over things that we don't understand, but to be open for truth. Truth is a solid foundation for us. And we don't have to be worried about different ideas and us not understanding it. What we need to do is be open-minded and see if we can glean truth from friends who have had different experiences than us, have been educated different than us, have different insight than we do, and do that in a loving way, understanding that we can accept one another, we can deeply love one another, we can honor one another, whether or not we agree on all the details.
And what I want to say just in closing is that the Bible says perfect love casts out all fear, and religion breeds fear. It's a really sad, scary thing, but we have been trained to be afraid of this and be afraid of that, and you don't like this, don't like that. It's like, you know what? Let's get a little more open-hearted, open-minded. And I will say this. Dave mentioned that David Martin has a brilliant mind, but what I see in David Martin is a heart of gold. I see a heart of gold that has integrity and has studied deeply many, many things that none of us have the time, energy, or mentality to study. And I just want to say what we can learn from him, let's learn from him, because his heart is a beautiful heart. His wife is absolutely a delight.
She is.
And honestly, I honor them for who they are. And God created them unique. And I'm excited to be able to learn from and share love with them. It's a beautiful thing. So God bless you all.
Right. So open your heart as Dr. David Martin unpacks this whole idea of alchemy. God bless you.
Cheryl Bryan, and I have my wonderful friend David Martin here with me, and we decided at breakfast this morning we're going to do a podcast. So I'm inviting you to join in and learn new things along with me, and the questions I ask might be challenging for David. Who knows? You never know.
She's going to finally stump me.
No, that would be a really good one.
Yeah, that'll be a great one.
Be a good one. Okay.
I'm looking forward to it.
So my questions, I have a number. I ask you about alchemy, but we'll come to that later. Yeah. So my questions are, the first time we met and I started telling you some of the things that I felt like God told me, I'm like, let me restate that I know that God told me. God told me when I was young, Cheryl, I want you to walk like Enoch walked. And you said, yep, you could do that. And I was like, what? Why are you saying you can do that? Why? Tell me that. Why do you say that? Because I tell people that all the time because I actually believe it. And I believe, well, God told me, Cheryl, nothing is impossible for those that believe. And I'm like, it's true. Can we get out of the unbelief of almost everyone and into walking in the full belief that nothing is impossible? So is that why you said that?
Well, no, I say it for a bunch of other reasons. Okay. If you think about your family lineage, like every family, there are metaphors that continue throughout lineages that have, unfortunately, in the modern era, been misinterpreted. We have a hard time with the concept, for example, of reincarnation. I had a beautiful time in southern India where I asked people who are very connected to that idea, what they mean by it. And it was really informative to hear that you expressed in this life form, you were actually incarnated into this life form that is Cheryl Bryan sitting here right now, because you were actually in part of that fearfully and wonderfully made story, placed into a lineage. Not any old place. You were placed into a lineage. And like we would say in physics, that neither matter can be created or destroyed. And we don't have a problem saying that in physics. We do have a problem saying that with life. And that's a sad thing, because if we actually understood that we are part of a lineage, you know, your life didn't start at conception.
Nope.
Your life started long before that.
It's actually what the Bible says.
Okay? And so you are, and if we get really, really technical about it, the sperm and the egg coming together don't die, and then something emerges in new life. It's two life forms coming together and continuing life, not begetting life. Right? This is not, you're not starting. You're continuing.
Forms, yes.
You're continuing the merger of two life forms. That's what you're doing. But there's no start. And equally, there's no end. It's a forever. We've always been connected. We always will be connected. That's just the way of things. We're the ones that tell the story of disconnection. Humans invent disconnection. And if you go back and examine the life and the story of Enoch, there's a very beautiful metaphor in there, which is a mantle that is part of the story, which is this notion that there is a bestowing of certain capabilities into the life of Enoch that is actually something which I would say, without having any question at all, is a lineage that you carry. And ironically, your children are also now part of that lineage. Whether they like it or not, whether they embrace it or not. You know what the cool thing is? The universal wisdom that actually decides what gets bestowed on whom does not care whether you agree with it or not. It
true.
doesn't care. You know, think about Moses and Aaron.
Yep.
And Moses go, well, I can't talk. Well,
Oh, well.
A, yes, you can. B, stop being a whining, pathetic being. Just go out and do what you're told to do, right? And go do it. But Moses still didn't like the idea of it. But he didn't like the idea of it not because he wasn't prepared to talk. He didn't like the idea of it because he had built an illusion by being raised in Pharaoh's house. He thought of himself as somebody who not only had privilege that the rest of the world didn't, but he also knew that he had killed somebody. And so his real problem was he didn't want to get arrested. Now, he lied to God, and he lied to Aaron, and he said, no, I don't want to talk. And God goes, if I ask you to do something, go do it. So if you were told, hey, guess what, Cheryl? There's this Enoch thing. You can go, I think my rational brain is saying, no, not really. And like the burning bush, like every other thing, the message is, I don't care. I don't care whether you believe it. You are entrusted with it. And here's the kicker for you specifically. The problem is when you try to talk yourself out of what you have been entrusted with, at a certain point in time, it can be taken away.
Oh, I know that.
I mean, think about, like,
I believe
let's just
that.
say that, I don't know, let's say I'm a hopeless romantic. And let's say that I bring a giant bouquet of roses home to Kim. If Kim actually got a bouquet of roses and she looked at them, and instead of going, thanks for the roses, or, oh my God, and come over and give me a kiss, she goes, but I wanted lilies. Right? What would that send? That would send a message,
Yep.
not just of ingratitude, but it would send a worse message,
Yeah.
which is, I don't care about the fact that you were entrusted with in this case, the love for me. I'm going to tell you that you are inadequate. I'm going to tell you that there's something wrong with you. You know what Kim has never done? She's never done that. Now, it turns out that I know she loves lilies. I know that. And for me, roses are a metaphor. So if I'm smart, if I want to communicate that this is coming from me, I'll bring roses. If I want to come and have another message, which is, I really care about what you care about, I'll bring lilies. Do you see the difference? Mm-hmm. Both of them are equally generous. but they send different messages. And here's what happens. When we're entrusted with a thing, and think about Enoch. We think about the end of his story, not the beginning of his story. And that's the sad thing, because we don't think about his life. We don't think about what that means. But the mantle of having access to a divine connection, which allows for what we would call supernatural, but we call it supernatural because we don't understand it is natural for those who are in that lineage. It's not supernatural. It's natural for those in the lineage. And we, because we don't want to stand out, we don't want to look weird, we don't want to act weird, we don't want people to think that we're weird, we decide to suppress the gift that we're given. And at a certain point, if you don't use it, it's not that you lose it, it's you actually desecrate the giver. And so when I said that to you, I was actually encouraging you to stop playing small.
I've had that happen a few times. The truth is that does happen to me. People tell me, they told me, a young youth pastor here said, Cheryl, God's trying to put you on his white soapbox, and he keeps putting the mic up in front of you, putting the lights on you, and you keep getting down.
Oh, hold on a second. Why don't we just think about what we just said before this started?
I know. We are.
I wonder.
And you keep pushing the mic away and saying, put the lights off.
But I don't want to be on camera, but I don't want to be in front of a mic.
Right. So
sorry, but that was kind of a loaded gift again.
Yeah, very funny. And then, you know what the rest of the prophecy was? He said, but what you don't understand right now is there'll be a day that you jump on that soapbox and you grab the mic and you put the lights on yourself. And I was like, no.
So let's just pause. Just pause and look exactly where you are. The lights are on you. The camera is on you, and you just grab the mic. See, you're fulfilling your own prophecy now.
There we go. It's pretty wild, honestly, watching life unfold. I had another prophet tell me, you're going to go on a quantum leap, and I know I have.
Well, and this conversation will take you definitely way past quantum, so get ready to jump.
I'm ready. I'm like, come on, let's bring it. So that is what my first question was, because when I first said that to you, because I tell people all the time, because I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, God said that to me. I'm like, okay, I had never thought about that, but since you said it, we better do this. That's your agenda for me, and your agenda for me is better than mine would be. And the truth is, I want to step on the box and go, hey, let's do it.
Yeah.
Because I do know that I have something to say that people may or may not be ready to hear, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. And I don't mind being weird, because my husband has told me for so many years, you are a very unique individual. I don't mind. I'm like, it's okay, because I actually believe that Jesus is everything that I need. I believe he's my life substance. I believe that he is the bread of life. I believe that I don't need natural food and natural water. I believe things that make people nervous. And I'm like, I'm okay with that. And have I only taken it a little ways? Yes. I've done, 8 days, no food, no water, which some people are like, oh my word. But I'm like, no, that's a taste test. But look what Moses did, right? So there's all kinds of stuff. So let's go back to what I originally said this morning over breakfast. Let's tell me about alchemy, because God told me, Cheryl, I want you to write a book called The Ultimate Alchemist. And he told me some of the things to put in it. And I haven't yet done that. And I actually was just texting a girl that is writing a book, and she was telling me, I'm going to help you. Let's do it. Let's do it. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Cool.
So that's why I'm asking you
so
these
funny
questions.
that we would have talked about Moses in preparation for a conversation about alchemy. Because most people don't realize that the word itself is highly likely to have its original present derivation from the Egyptian cosmology of Kemt. Now, I'm using an anglicized pronunciation, but throughout most of human history, we somehow keep most of this word together, which is very fascinating to me. I find it horrifically interesting when words don't change, because most words do, but this one doesn't. The Greeks, when they started interacting with the Egyptians, which historically we would say, is that kind of cross-Mediterranean interaction that took place somewhere about 1000 BC, if depending on who you pay attention to historically. But somewhere along the line, the Greeks were inspired by the Egyptian idea of this transformation effect, which became the Greek word chemi, which is the Greek that becomes the background of the word alchemy. You can hear that. But the difference is alchemy is the transformation from the Almighty. Al, God, chemi. I love your face, by the way,
It's
right now.
what God told me. I mean, this is in the book. This is the book.
It feels like I'm speaking because
It's important.
no.
Interesting.
And by the way, and I'm going to put a pin in this because Kim wants to have all this thunder tomorrow, so I can't steal any of her thunder today. But sometimes we are warned away from the thing that is probably the most important thing that we should be focused on. And sometimes, particularly in the last 2,000 years, the church has decided that the only thing to do is hide the truth from people by pretending that the truth is evil. We've been told that alchemy and magic are dark arts. But we literally once called it the transformation of the divine. Now let's go back to the story of Moses, and you know where this story needs to start. You remember when Moses and Aaron go into the Pharaoh's presence the first time, right? Mm-hmm. And you remember that there's a bit of theatrics that go on, right?
Quite.
My favorite, just because I would have loved to have watched it because I think it would be fun, is the staff into the snake gig.
Yeah, that's quite.
I think that's a fun story. You take your staff, you throw it on the ground, it turns into a snake, it runs around. My favorite part is it eats up all the other snakes. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Not really a setting for a church.
Huh?
Not really a setting for a church.
No, and I would say that the vast majority of blue blood Christian churches right now, if that event happened in the church, they would be praying about the possession rather than the work of God.
Yeah, it's true.
Because they would go, but it's a snake.
It's straight out of the Bible.
And you go, yes, and it. Listen,
Ate the other snakes.
he could have thrown his staff and it would have become an aardvark. He could have.
Or anything, yeah.
Or a giraffe.
Yep.
A giraffe would have been cumbersome because giraffes would have a hard time eating other giraffes. But let's just say the story was it went down and became an aardvark for whatever reason. It would not be as dramatic to have an aardvark eat other aardvarks because you just sit there going, well, that doesn't look as cool. Snakes eating snakes is a pretty cool thing. So I like the fact that we picked that story, but if you slow the story down, that was Alchemy. That was Moses showing not the supremacy of God, right, which is what Christianity and what the Hebrew tradition has done with that story. This wasn't my God is better than your gods. That's not what it was. It's the alchemy of light is consuming the alchemy of darkness. Right? All the other little snakes were the magic. They were the sorcerers. They were the spellcasters. They were the
dark side.
They were the best the dark side had.
Yeah.
And you have Moses throwing down the staff, and he wasn't winning a god off. Right? We want to do this. Our God is best. No, our God is not best. The God in that story and the God who's trying to get through to humanity is light,
Yeah.
is
Light.
good,
Love.
not the conquering, ours is better than yours, right? And unfortunately, this is where we've lost the plot of the story. And this is where if we're going to tell the story of alchemy, we have to start the story because the first evidence of it is Moses' action. And conveniently, it's kind of in the front of the book, so it's not hard to find, right? That the first story we're told about this is important. But the reason why I'm saying that is historically, we don't even use the term because we decided that the story of what happened in Egypt needs to be told through a Hebrew lens. but it was not a Hebrew story because there were no Hebrews at the time. That's why it's not a Hebrew story. And this is where we keep kind of breaking down our own wisdom, and then we go, I wonder why we can't figure things out. Well, because we're not thinking about what we could figure out, right? The same problem we have a couple thousand years later when we forget that Jesus went to Egypt and in all likelihood grew up speaking, are you ready for this? Egyptian. Because when do you acquire language? You acquire language in the first 12 years of your life. You know where Jesus spent the first 12 years of his life? Probably in Egypt, because that's roughly how long that purge of children and the purge of looking for the king of the Jews was going on. So he probably spoke Egyptian. He probably learned Egyptian. He probably went to school in Egypt. He probably had Egyptian inputs because, ready for this? He was living in Egypt. That may be why. But we forget that. We think that it went from a manger in Bethlehem to 30 years later, he just shows up on the scene as a son of a carpenter. Nonsense.
Yeah.
He was in Egypt. He was trained in Egyptian. He spoke Egyptian. He was exposed to Egyptian tradition. And so he probably knew alchemical tools from Egypt. You know why? Because that's what people learned in Egypt. So is the water into wine really anything other than something he learned how to do? I offend people every time I say that, except for the fact that the evidence of what I'm saying is true. It's recorded in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of schools. But we're not willing to do this. And this is the reason why, if we're going to set the stage for the answer to your question, we have to remember, what is it? It is the transformation of the divine. And if we understand that that's what the word alchemy is. And by the way, I'm not justifying the dark arts that have used it. And there are a lot. And they have used it to horrible effects. Most recently, they've used it to try to kill off the population of Earth through the manipulation of mRNA. Pseudouridine, the thing that is in all the injections that people got for COVID, is an alchemical pathway to kill humanity. It actually takes a very short strand of information in the form of nucleic acids, and it actually turns on a cancer gene. That's an alchemical transformation. Now, I would suggest to you that it's the darkest of dark arts. But don't think for a minute that people who put it in weren't putting the curse on humanity in using the dark arts alchemical process. You don't put a thing in that you know is meant to kill people unless you are, ready for this, meaning to kill people. Right? So this is why we have to be really careful. I don't ever play with this topic lightly, because I'm not saying, oh, let's romanticize it and let's go, alchemical things are always good. No, they're not. They can be hijacked like every other energy on Earth. But the fact is that we don't have a common understanding of what it is. And as such, what we've done is we've actually thrown it into this kind of questionable camp of, you know, what the Aleister Crowleys and the, you know, and the Illuminatis and the everybody else's that we want to turn into the bad guys, right? We say, well, but they do it, therefore it must be bad. No. They're doing it and they're using it because we have taken it out of our toolbox of what we could do for good.
Well, clearly, from my perspective, when God told me, write the ultimate alchemist, and it's him, from my perspective, it's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Right.
It's like, I don't know anything about alchemy. I know it's turning one substance into another.
Yeah.
That's
So
all I know.
let's start with the very first one that we have in any recorded literature. The very first one. Go to Genesis 1, and we'll start with the first alchemy. Okay. There is allegedly, the world was without form and void. And what happens? God moves over the surface of, what does it say?
The water. The earth.
See, no, this is the fun part. I'm already trapping you. This is part.
You're good at
this,
that, and that's why I was excited.
Yeah, no, that's why it's so exciting, right?
Yep.
He moves over the
face.
darknesses and the waters. But we said that it was without form and void, but he moves over the face of something.
Well, it's tohu ebohu,
Yep.
right? Without form, and it's destroyed,
Right?
right? Isn't
But
that
to
what
have
we do?
something
With a
destroyed
face.
means that there was a thing, right?
Oh, I believe that.
Yeah. So there's something that was there that
Prior
went
to
away.
that. Yep.
But we said in the beginning there was destruction.
I think so.
But in the beginning.
Well,
But what is that? And here's
the
the
beginning
trap,
of
right?
this piece.
Exactly. But this is where we get into the linguistic trap,
Mm-hmm.
which allows us to be blinded to the process. Right? Modern physics gives us this very interesting paradox of the black hole. And according to now the most modern cutting edge physics, the black hole exists as the sum of all information in the universe. And what happens is as the all information gets to its completion, it moves into a phase which we call a black hole. Every physicist now publishing on the topic roughly agrees with that a black hole is the sum, it's the infinite mass of all information. And it's interesting that out of that, in modern physics, the next thing that happens is light. Black holes are the embryo of the now emancipation of the birth of the next, whatever the next is. So the story of the very beginning of the beginning, which starts with an end, which we never talk about, which I think is worth talking about, just to make people feel very uncomfortable.
well, I was going to
Because-
bring it up
Because if you're saying that we're starting with an ending,
well,
then
Then
we're
that could be
starting
where-
with a thing, which is an interesting thing that begets before the beginning, which means
I believe that.
there's another beginning,
I
and
believe
there's another beginning, and there's another beginning. And the point of this is that if we go back and say, what is this? And remember, alchemy, what is that? That is the divine transformation. What's happening is, in this world of destruction, a spirit or an energy or a force is moving across that. And movement is very important because transformation can never happen in stasis. I can't go to the top of a mountain and just sit and be transformed. I actually have to be moving. I have to be in motion for any of these things to happen. In my own industry, and we'll get to this, we've actually proven that the effect that happens in static conditions cannot be replicated in moving conditions and vice versa. Movement is part of alchemy. Transformation requires movement. So you'll never get there by sitting on your couch reading self-help books. You'll never get there by sitting in conferences and going, oh, I'm inspired. You'll never get there. You actually have to do something. You have to put yourself in motion for transformation to happen. But what we have in the ingredients of alchemy is energy, light, movement, and then here comes the magic. The magic is a changed perspective. You have to be able to alter your perspective. So you have to get to a place where the way you saw a thing is no longer the way you see it.
Oh, I believe that. I totally believe that. And I tell people that even with the food thing,
Yeah,
it's about what you think you have to have.
correct.
It's about what you think you need. The Bible
Right.
says the Spirit gives life. It doesn't actually say that food brings life.
Right.
So there's all kinds of concept changes that
Yeah.
I think we have to undergo and be willing to look at and
Exactly.
go, we aren't what we were told and we don't need what we were told we need. It's
Right.
totally other than that.
Yeah, and all of it is to build dependency, not on a healthy dependency.
Yeah.
Where a healthy dependency would say is the sharing of purpose rather than the insufficiency of one
Yeah.
requiring the succor of another.
Right. So if Moses went to the top of the mountain
Right.
and did no food and no water and he came out shining,
Right.
if we believe that, then why are we afraid?
Right.
Doesn't
Because
make
we've
any
been told to
sense.
be afraid.
Because, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It's
Right.
like, no.
And last time I checked, I haven't yet met the person who fully nourished with the traditional thing we call food and fully hydrated with the traditional thing we call water has ever been handed the library on stone tablets
Right.
from the Almighty. I've never seen that happen. So
Or their face isn't beaming.
yeah,
right?
and I've never seen that happen at a McDonald's or a
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. See, so that's the way I look
There
at
you go.
life. Exactly. So,
So movement, light, energy, and changed perspective. The ingredients
is huge.
of alchemy.
Very interesting.
Because remember, then out of that then comes what? The second day, which is even a more problematic day, isn't it?
Yeah, which you know more about than
My,
me by a long
well, so,
shot.
but this is, but we can talk about it poetically and metaphorically, which is the way the Hebrew tells the story. And we can also talk about it literally, and we can also talk about it mathematically. And it's worth talking about all three of those. Because the second day of creation is actually one of the most fascinating. It is the only day of creation in which God didn't say that the thing he had done was actually done. Day one, it was good. Not good, tov, Hebrew, fit for service. Day two, he never adjudicated as even fit for anything.
Wow.
Day three, we get plants. And ironically, on day four, we get light from the sun, which means the story of photosynthesis is not true. Which is a giant bummer to everybody who sits there going, "Oh, I think I understand how the system works." No, you don't. Because plant life started growing without the sun.
Before.
That's a mind bend. Because we've been told you can't grow things without sunlight, except for the fact that all of the growing things predate the sun by a day. And on the third day of creation, when God says it is fit for service, it is good, he did not say it will be better tomorrow when I make the sun.
Right.
Nowhere in Genesis does it say it's almost good enough, but wait till you see the sunlight. No. And day four, when we get the sun and the stars and we get all the cool stuff in the sky, all of that stuff on the fourth day is not, oh, I actually made plants and then, oops, I forgot I needed the light. No. Day three was fine by itself. Day four is fine by itself. The reason why this is important is you have to realize that there's something that happens on the second day, which if you want to understand alchemy, you have to understand the second day. Because the second day, if we actually think about it, is unfortunately something that in modern times we've created an illusion around, which we think of as dualism. It's the first time we actually use the word separation. Now, this is very hard for people to unpack, so I'm going to try to do it in pieces.
Okay.
When we think of separation, right now we mean putting one thing apart from another. Right? So this is how we get to dualism. This is how we get to right and wrong, good and bad, light and dark, all this kind of stuff. We get to dualism through the notion of separation, as though these things are apart from each other. We would be more correct with the Hebrew if we actually said distinction, not separation. You and I can look at each other right now, and I can pick a feature about you. You have red hair. I don't have hair. That is a distinguishing feature, but it doesn't separate us.
Separation, yeah.
Right?
Gotcha.
You're not better. Well, you are, but
No, very.
generally speaking, hypothetically, I mean, if Kim was sitting next to you, it would be even worse. I'd be, 2 against -1, right? But we could pick a distinguishing feature and we could say that's a distinction, but that doesn't separate us as beings.
Right, it's just different.
And unfortunately, what the second day of creation in the story gives us is the notion of the tension. Buckminster Fuller would call it tensegrity, which is the energy that is the connecting energy. It's the elastic energy that pulls us together by putting things at a distance. It doesn't mean they're apart. It means they are now holding energy at a distance.
Distinguished.
Okay? And it's distinction. But here's the part, and Bucky Fuller is a good example of another way of thinking about this. When we decide that you are edge to edge Cheryl, so Cheryl is the organic material sitting on the opposite side of the table, and Dave is the organic material sitting on the side of the table, and we've decided we are separate. Then we have to jump through all kinds of entanglement hoops, quantum physics hoops. Why is it that we still might share thoughts? Why is it that we still might share connections? Why is it that sometimes I'll just be walking through Virginia and go, I'm thinking about Cheryl Bryan? Why? We have to create entanglement stories when we decide separation is a function of geometry, shape, and distance. And our misunderstanding of the second day of creation is what gives us that. We said God said to separate things. But God did not say to separate things. God said put tension in the system by creating distinction. That's what the second day is. All you have to do, and this is the root of alchemy. The root of alchemy is the second day. Because in the second day, what you have to see is where there is tension in a system, that if we alter perspective, energy, and light, we can actually use that tension to transform into something else. That's all it is. It's
I
the
do believe
tension
that. Yeah.
of the instance of what we think we see
And the vantage
transformed
point. Yeah.
into another instance of what we see. Now, I like to do this just because it really irritates huge numbers of people. We were given, courtesy of Charles Darwin, the idea of survival. Prior to the natural philosophy movement, survival is not in any language, it is not in any tradition, it is not a dogmatic position. Neither is the concept of fight and flight. The idea that the world's out to get you, that there's a predator somewhere and you are prey, or you are the predator and something else is prey. We invented that concept, and we did it as a birth of natural philosophy. But the vast majority of the social awareness around it is courtesy of Darwin, where he used the term survival of the fittest. Okay? That's not real. Never has been, never will be. There's a very interesting story in the Catamo Caves in Mexico of a very particular type of snake that lives in the roofs of the caves in which bats live. And in the evenings, when the bats fly out of the caves, the snakes hanging from the ceiling catch the bats and eat them. Now, this same kind of snake exists many other places on Earth, but nowhere but this cave does it hang from the ceiling.
Oh.
You know what else hangs from ceilings?
Bats.
Bats. Here's an interesting alchemical question. Very interesting question. And this snake is a land-dwelling snake, but not in the cave of bats. So the question is, do the snakes eat the bats? Or is there a relationship between bats and snakes? Whereas the snakes have eaten bats, they have taken on the intelligence of the bat.
They've become bat-like.
And they have become bat snakes. Just like the bat flying into the snake is not being preyed upon by the snake. It is moving into its snake form. And the reason why people don't like to hear that is because they don't think about biology. It turns out when a lion or a cheetah is chasing an antelope, we go, look, there's the predator, that's the prey. Why? Because we've been conditioned to think of a world where something's out to get you. Nobody considers the possibility that by pumping adrenaline into the meat, you're actually increasing the lion's capacity to digest that meat. Is the running gazelle marinating itself so that it has a lion experience that's healthier?
Way outside my...
But think about it. Yeah. Think about what I just said.
Yeah,
if we actually think about it, we would see alchemy everywhere. We would actually see
transforming from one.
That the transformation is not the end of life, right? We've been told to fear death. We've been told to fear the predator. We've been told there's this, even in the Bible, the metaphor, there's a prowling lion, right? We've been told to fear things. rather than to say, what if the whole system was designed to say that, yeah, today you were a bat, but you might have a hankering to have an experience as a snake. So you're now living in the cave in Mexico where that transformation is part of a natural order. What if we saw the savannah not as this blood sport killing ground? What if we saw the savannah as a place where that antelope that's running is now going to have a lion transformation? And the reason I ask the question is because if we saw the natural order the way it actually works, we would see alchemy everywhere. When the tree falls and the fungus grows on it, did the tree die, or did the tree now become the intelligent web of all the mycelium that are the brain trust that is required for trees to grow? Did the tree die, or did the tree know that it had absorbed the wisdom of its treeness, which now it wants to share with other trees, and the way to do it, it's actually going, I'm done with the treeness of being tree. Now I'm going to fall. Now I'm going to be welcome space for the fungus to come. The mycelium are going to now run off of me and feed all of my lived experiences tree into my fellow trees. So I've now built myself into the lattice and the matrix of the intelligence of a system that says now all the trees are connected to the treeness wisdom that I got as a tree. Now I'm not looking like a tree anymore, but I am the essence of all trees because now I'm connected to all of these other trees. When I was standing alone in the forest, I couldn't share my wisdom. But if I fall, then I can. That almost sounds like something very famous that someone else said.
Later
right?
in your life, yeah.
But for the seed falling into the ground, right? And Cheryl, here's the thing. This is a story we should be telling. Because when we've decided to demonize a technology that has been used since the beginning of our story, what we've done is we've taken the operating system of life out of our life, and then we wonder why we struggle. We wonder why it's so difficult to navigate this very difficult world. Well, I got an idea. Maybe because we're telling a story that is so defiled that we've lost the plot. It's like trying to swim the English Channel without arms and legs and wondering why you sink. Well, you're sinking because you're not using your arms and legs. That's why you sink. And this is the problem. The problem is humanity is at a stage where we need to be able to reconcile ourselves with the fact that we have pulled off of our option list the very tools that God used in creation, and we wonder why we struggle navigating creation. That's not a question, and it's not a problem, and it's the reason why you were told to write the book. Not asked to, told to.
Yeah, I was told and shown what it looked like. So for me...
And by the way, you can just go ahead and transcribe this conversation, and 3/4 of your book is already written for you. Isn't that amazing?
Well, he told me to go through the Bible, and every time there was an instance that was greater than possible,
Yep.
like Moses,
Yep.
everything that was greater. So
Yep.
what Moses did going up the mountain,
Yep.
obviously he got transformed,
Yeah.
or there was a transfiguration of sorts, or he wouldn't have come down beaming.
Right.
But that came out of an obedience,
Right.
and it came out of an other than concept, other than what everybody says is possible.
Right.
So,
But see, you would have forgotten the snake story if I didn't tell you.
yeah, but I do bring up the snake story.
No,
I
I'm
don't.
just saying you
I
wouldn't
don't bring up the snake. It eating the other ones. I bring up the fact that he threw it down
yeah,
and
I
it
know.
turned into a snake.
Yeah.
And I never even think about the little snakes it ate. I just think, now that's a very novel concept.
Right. But the
For
reason why I bring that particular metaphor up is because we have in the story of the corruption of alchemy the idea that we're going to take something that is of a base condition and make it a better condition. So all the alchemist stories are led into gold or what have you. But the foolhardiness of those stories are self-evident. If it was possible to transform lead into gold, then the value of gold would become lead.
Yeah, it'd be nothing. Yeah.
So the intent of doing that is self-evidently foolish. The reason why we allow it to exist in the occult, and the reason why we encourage its existence in the occult, is because we don't really want everybody to be able to do that. We want a select few people to be able to do it to manipulate power. Because if everybody knew how to do it, then everybody would go out, find all the lead they could buy up. Tomorrow, they'd turn it all into gold, and now gold would have the value of lead, which is a dumb idea, which no one would do. But the occult, and this is a trigger that people need to be aware of, when people use alchemy to reorder value, that's always evil. Always. It's always evil to do it so that you can get power, so that you can get influence, so you can get control, so that you can get an advantage. That is not the reason why we were given this tool.
Yeah, it's evil-hearted. Yeah.
And so it's really important that we point out that if people go, well, how do you know it's good or bad? Easy. Super easy.
Yeah, motive of the heart.
If the motive is I'm going to create scarcity, I'm going to take power, I'm going to create fear, I'm going to do whatever. If that's the motive, it's always evil.
Yeah.
So it's not, you don't have to have a PhD like you and Dave have in spiritual warfare. You can be pretty much an idiot to figure this one out. Is the person trying to take advantage of someone or something? In that case, it's evil.
It's evil, yeah.
If they're doing something to transform a system for the betterment of everyone, that's good. That's it.
So off the top of your head, in the Bible, what are the alchemy things that you can think of? Like
Everything we call a miracle of Jesus is an alchemy, and I can reproduce them all because I have reproduced them all.
Well, and
Every one of them. So if you actually currently go through the list of all the things that happen, every single one of those is an alchemical transformation. Every one of them. But if you go back through the Old Testament, the highlight reel, if we were going to create a highlight reel of it, there's no question that one of my favorite ones is the prophet at the well, when the little boy comes and says, the prophet says, make me a cake. The little boy goes, if I make you a cake, me and my mother are going to die. He gets the cake. The mother makes it. And it says for the rest of the famine, the barrel of oil never ran out. They called it a cruse, depending on what translation you're using. The cruse of oil never ran dry, and the flour never ran out. That's pure alchemy. If you actually look at all of the Ark stories, every one of the Ark stories, the Ark of the Covenant stories, that's all alchemy.
when the people died, all that?
Everything. If you touch it, you die. But if you look upon it, and when Moses lifts up the serpent in the wilderness, that's alchemy. Because what that was, when he did it, was actually a transformation of energy. One of the mistakes that you can make when you go through the Bible stories is most of the alchemical stories appear as artifacts. But they're not appreciated when it's energetic transformations. Nehemiah in the presence of the king is alchemy. When the king actually says, "Why is your face downcast?" Right? That's alchemy.
Why?
Very simply. Because the idea of that story is that you have a bodyguard to a king. That bodyguard is there to protect the life of the king and does it with joy. That's the energetic tension that's being built in the system. Here's a prophet of God, Nehemiah, who's got a really crap job distinction, which is protect the worst guy on earth from being assassinated.
Yeah, that's rough.
Terrible job.
Yep.
He does it smiling every single day of his life. That's the tension. That's the distinction that we walk past in the story. He's building distinction. He's a really good guy, a really bad guy. That's the tension. The day he walks in with his face downcast is the moment of transformation, because at that point in time, the loyalty he has earned with the king, which is energy he's put into the system, changes the king's heart entirely. And what does the king do? He doesn't just, and this is why it's alchemy, he doesn't just emancipate the resources for Nehemiah to go rebuild the city. And we do the whole Sanballat story, and we go down the story, and we go, oh, that's the story that gets the attention. But it clearly says in the story that he also reappropriates funds for everyone else of every faith to go back and rebuild all of their temples. This is not a most favored. Nehemiah is not the only beneficiary, because if you don't see the alchemy, you would go, that was favoritism. But it's not favoritism, because what was emancipated was not limited to Nehemiah's benefit.
It was a transformation.
It was a transformation that actually impacted everyone. And there's a key learning in that one, which people don't understand. Alchemy is never for the benefit of the individual. It is always for the benefit of the whole.
Oh, I believe.
Magic is for the benefit of the individual.
Interesting. Very
And
interesting.
blurring that line is where we make mistakes. Right?
Yeah.
When Jesus did
pure
water
heart
into
is
wine,
always for the other people.
but without distinction. This is the important thing. Because remember, what's alchemy? It's using the energy of distinction for transformation. It isn't distinction for distinction.
Yeah.
It's actually distinction for transformation, which is a very large shift.
Yeah.
You can always tell Daniel and Lion's Den, alchemy. How do you walk into fire? Alchemy. Every one of those stories is. What is it for? The benefit of the people.
So how does the fire, how is that one alchemy?
Because what happens is you create the illusion of fire, which is both metaphorically and actually an agent of purification.
Yeah.
And in most instances, you would say if a human gets thrown into fire, they die.
Transforms them from one substance to another.
Exactly. But in this case, it does not only that. It purifies for the benefit of everyone, because what happens after that story is now all of a sudden the emancipation of the God of Daniel becomes an interesting, transformative story that hits everybody. Not just the, oh, these guys become the hero story because they actually survive the fire. And this is where, once again, religion misses the boat, because we're not seeing the story as it is told. Remember, I'm not spinning anything here. I'm actually telling the story correctly as it is written. And unfortunately, it's not the Sunday school version. But the Sunday school version doesn't teach kids how to do alchemy. Because we want to create the notion that the only people who are capable of doing the miracle or doing the whatever, we want to pretend like that is reserved for the select few. But it isn't. It is a capacity that is given to every single person.
Right. But
everyone.
Most people won't lean into it.
But it's not that they won't even lean into it. Most people are warned against it.
No.
Because most people are told that it's part of the occult, or it's part of the dark arts, or it's part of something else. And that's because we've decided to take this subclass of abuse. And that's why I don't diminish the truth of there has been abuse, but a bunch of abuse. But there is no question that by rejecting it as a technology, as a utility that is available to everyone, what we've done is we've actually given ourselves no ability to navigate the world with one of the greatest tools that we have.
Very interesting. I knew I was in over my head to begin with. So my personal thing is just take what God told me.
Yeah.
It's like, Cheryl, write the book, The Ultimate Alchemist. And I'm like, I know this much about alchemy, right? So when I saw you, I thought, I'll ask him. He's going to know a heck of a lot more about it than I would ever imagine. So for me, God is the ultimate alchemist, and we are a part. We came from him. The intention is for our hearts to be transformed into his very same image, that I would look exactly like he would look, that on earth as it is in heaven. My personal opinion is that he gave everyone that invitation. It's an invitation that goes to everyone. And anyone that decides, you know what, that can happen. It's the lens change. It's like if I look at the difficulties of life as a chance to be changed.
Right.
That's what I preach all the time.
So if you look at difficulty, once again now, through a slightly different lens, and there's nothing wrong. If you see difficulty in the picture, that's fine. That's the reflex that people characterize the story in. But if you actually look at a difficulty, no matter what it is, and go, what is the tension that is being built in a system that is now not separated but distinct?
Okay,
right? If
so
we
let's
see a
do-
difficulty.
Let's do a gun to my head.
Yeah.
So that's the difficulty. The difficulty is God told me take this kid into your home, treat
Yeah.
him like a son. Now he has a gun to my head.
Right.
People can say it's not difficult, but
No, it isn't.
well, it actually wasn't that difficult
No,
for me.
it
was
isn't. And that's
kind
the
of
po-
fun and challenging.
Yeah, but that's the point. I've had guns pushed into my chest.
Right.
I've had people yelling at me that they were going to take my life and all those sorts of
Right.
things. It's a wonderful thing when you can recognize that in every one of those instances, it is not difficult. Why? Much like we talked about with the caves and the snakes and bats. When the person put a gun to your head and said, I can kill you, the answer is that the illusion, which was the magic, where that individual thought that this piece of metal that had this propellant,
Yeah.
which is phosphorus and a bunch of other things, he actually thought that that thing had power.
Had the power over me.
So
yeah.
in magic, what you do is you try to actually put life force energy into an inanimate object, and you try to actually allow that thing to now have power. The problem is, when you do that in dark arts, the power has to come from somewhere, right? So he had to have a belief. Somewhere in his belief, which, by the way, is about as distinct from your belief as you can get, which is you're pretty sure, and I know this from your own life, you're pretty sure that a inanimate object is probably not as powerful as the God that you serve.
Yeah.
You're pretty sure about that.
Pretty positive.
Okay?
Pretty
So
positive.
now he's going, well, hold on a second. I'm going to put my life force transaction in this thing called a gun, and I'm going to somehow present the gun as an evidence of I have something more powerful than you have.
I have power over you.
Okay? That's a distinction built on the illusion of separation. But you had connected with this young man as a mother to a son,
Right.
as a person showing love to a person who didn't understand love. And the only way he could have experienced love is by putting a gun to your head. That's the only way he could have experienced it. Because if he didn't take the absolute extreme moment of I am now going to put a gun to the head of the person who has shown me love, then the energy could have never discharged in the system. And the absence of a bullet coming into your head proves the point that I have seen made over and over and over and over and over again wrong. Tesla, very famously, had this what was considered to be an improbable access to understanding the way the universe worked. And people marvel about it all the time. But I've often said that Tesla was blinded by the lightning. And what do I mean by that? Literally and metaphorically, what he chased was, how do I harness the energy of the discharge? Okay, so a little bit of science here, right? In a system, we think of an anode and a cathode. We think of these two charged elements that build charges to the point where they arc. And the arc is lightning. We call that lightning. That's what happens when a cloud mixes the waters and the vapors and a bunch of other things, and through that process creates an electrical charge. And then the earth and the cloud connect in a thing we call lightning. Well, when I say he was blinded by lightning, there are tons of magicians, and I'm using that term technically, who want to figure out how to harness the power of lightning. But the problem is, the power wasn't in the lightning. The power was in the moment before the discharge. The discharge is merely the evidence of the power. But the power, maximally, was the moment right before the lightning strike. But because we're so in love with the idea of the power of lightning, we forget that the more power was the moment before the light happened. Now, why am I putting these stories together? Lightning would have been a bullet went in your head. That would have been the discharge of the energy. And that would have actually left you with a hole in your head and would have left him having shot you. Mm-hmm. But the transformation, which is the transformation that matters, is not the lightning. It's when you can harness the energy of the moment right before the moment. One of the things I've done professionally is figured out that the world has been blinded by the lightning. Alchemy is never the lightning. Because the lightning happens with no plan. It has no immediate benefit. It's not targeted. It just is. It is just the release of energy. But the moment right before the lightning is when all of the possibilities exist. And so your certainty that this young man, as devastated as his story was and as wrecked as his life may have appeared, your transformation capacity for that young man required that he put a gun to your head. It was necessary. Because he could never have experienced love if the distinction hadn't been maximized to the point right before the lightning strike. Mm-hmm. And the coolest thing about this is if you see the world through the lens of, if you went through the Bible and said, where were all the alchemies? The answer would be every time the action of one person at an extreme condition transformed a community experience. Every time. That was alchemy.
Very interesting. That is very, very interesting. So, I wouldn't have described it that way, but that is exactly. I mean, I know. I always say, no, God took opposites. He would say, Mom, I'm the most corrupt person in the area. I don't have a conscience, nothing. And you're probably the most righteous person from his perspective.
Yep, that's fine.
And that was just the way he saw it. He's like, what are we even doing in the same car?
Right.
But I always felt like God set that up on purpose for transformation of not just him, but me.
Absolutely.
So for me, I was being transformed because I was being challenged to the core of my being. Can you love in this setting?
Right.
Can you love in that setting? So that would be alchemy.
Well, and then, actually, the final alchemy, when you stop asking any of those questions, can you just be love?
Become love. That's the whole.
Not in a setting, not to a person.
Become
right?
love.
Can you become love?
That's
where absolutely nothing, no matter what it is, stands in the way of the capacity for you to emanate that, regardless of the condition, regardless of the situation, regardless of who's the other side of that. And this is where, unfortunately, I hate what Hallmark greeting cards have done to this. It's so far beyond the word unconditional.
Yeah.
Because that still implies that there would be conditions somewhere. This isn't about condition or unconditional or anything else. It is the emanation within you of the pure love, which is part of the essential nature that is woven into your DNA. If you're willing to let it express, it is the pure nature that you are, which doesn't need a transaction. I don't need to have the feedback.
Yeah.
Right? And let's be
becoming love.
You,
and that's
you
what I
are
believe.
the emanating force of it. And if you ask the question, yes, but isn't it coming from somewhere? Yes, but it's coming through you as a vessel of the infinite nature of that in everything. And that's why it's no longer Cheryl's love.
Yeah, it's not.
It is love.
Yeah.
And when that love encounters anything or anyone else, it's still there.
Yeah.
Regardless.
And that's what I believe. I believe our job, should we choose to engage,
there you go,
is to become love.
Right.
And that requires difficulty. You don't know how much you can forgive unless you're challenged to the core of your being.
Exactly.
You don't know. So to me, I thank God. I look at my life and laugh. I think, God, you're hilarious. The things you've set up for me are hilarious. But
Yeah.
this little alchemy piece, so far outside my understanding. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to write it. I am going to write the book because he said to.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, you would know more about that by far than I would. But there's obviously way too much of it in the Bible.
Yeah.
Clearly, a ton of it. But he said we could be transfigured. Jesus was transfigured before he died and rose. Before any of that, he was transfigured.
Yeah.
So the question is, do we believe we can interface with the cloud of witnesses? Do we believe that we can be transfigured if we go to the top of the mountain? So to me, I'm excited. I just think, yay, the journey is exciting. It's no joke. And I do believe in the journey of becoming love. Like for me, it's been the prison boys, the prison, the gangs. God told me, I want the gangs. And I was like, you can have them.
Right.
I didn't know anybody,
Right.
but I did start praying for them. I'm like, God, do you care about them? They're people that you care about.
Right. And let's come back to the fact that they are not the bad guys.
No.
You're not the
They're the
good-
hurt. They're the hurt people.
Exactly.
And everyone's hurt at
is that?
different
That is-
levels.
that is a place, and we can't leave this without touching on the fact that it was Einstein and Hilbert and other mathematicians that created the illusion of quantum anything, because they need to entangle that which they separated. So that's why we have quantum anything. We defined a world that was defined by separation, and now we're trying to mathematically resolve an entanglement to try to create the image and the illusion of God instead of actually looking at the fact that there never was a separation. There was a distinction, and the distinction was the moment in time when there was tension put into the system by distinction, which just energizes any and every transformation that we can want. And the reason why we currently have physicists spending billions of dollars in Switzerland and France right now at CERN. We're trying to figure out how we can model quantum entanglement. And we spent billions of dollars to resolve a question that is an illusion we created. We created the illusion of separation. That never was anything, ever. It never existed. Distinction did exist. The tension that gives rise from that distinction does exist, but separation never did. We will be and always have been infinitely and permanently linked to the source of all creation. Period. And as Jonah found out by going on a swimming trip, as it doesn't matter who it is, Moses found out by trying to run away from, having to go speak to Pharaoh. Every time you run away, the great news is, there's a very, very patient energy that goes, go bust your pick, go do your thing, and you'll never get away. There's a beautiful story in the Buddhist tradition that I absolutely love. It's my favorite story of the Chinese cosmology, which is this wonderful character called Sun Wukong, who in the Hindu tradition is Hanuman, the monkey king, monkey god. But the story that I love is a story where this monkey deity gets to a point where he's pretty much too big for his britches, and he gets to a showdown with Buddha. And so they're at this heavenly, in the Chinese story, it's a jade palace. And so they're in a jade palace, and the monkey's going, I can pretty much do pretty much anything because I'm amazing. And Buddha just sits there and kind of smiles and goes, okay, I get it. You're pretty amazing. He even encourages monkey. He goes, yeah, you're pretty amazing. In fact, I bet you're so amazing. I bet you can fly to the edge of the universe faster than I can. And the monkey, who is full of himself, goes, absolutely I can. So he takes his iron cudgel, which is this iron cudgel that he got from the center of the Milky Way, and he goes, I'm going to fly to the edges of the 5 columns that hold up the universe, and I'm going to get there and come back before you can do the same thing. So it's this race. It's like a scavenger hunt race. It's the monkey and it's Buddha. And so the monkey grabs his iron cudgel, flies off, and he's so convinced that he's going to prove a point that he actually carves his initials. He graffitis the 5 pillars of the universe. And he carves his name in the 5 columns. And he flies back and he lands and he's sitting there and he goes, I was so fast. I went to the edge of the universe. I carved my name in the columns of the 5 pillars that hold up the universe. And Buddha turns his hand over. And in fresh blood, Monkey has carved his name on the 5 fingers of Buddha. And I love that story because it shows up in almost every religious tradition where your name has been carved on a heart or carved on a hand. Your name has been known, right? The Almighty is willing to play your game, right? He'll play along. If you need to go convince yourself that you are whatever you are, great. But I love the simplicity of that story, where this almighty and generous being just goes, yep, you're mine, still mine, always have been, always will be, and you can fly as far as you want, and you can have all the magic powers you want, and you can do anything you want, and guess what? Still mine.
Yeah.
And the reason I share that story in the context of alchemy is I think that that's where we need to really understand this. We've been given this amazing capacity to transform, to actually do it where we can see things that are broken and we can heal them, and we can see things that have been destroyed and we can actually re-enliven them or rejuvenate them. Those are all amazing things. But we can't do it if we don't have almost the arrogance and the audacity of going, yep, I'm up for the task. I can actually go fly to the edge of the universe. I can go do those things. We need to have that same sense of simultaneously the reckless optimism of going, I think I can do something here. I think I'm here to help be part of the transformation. And that takes not this artificial humility. That takes arrogance. That takes confidence. That takes a lot of things we don't like to see in people, because we need to be able to put ourselves out there and not worry if somebody goes, well, I think Cheryl's just crazy. Okay, great. You can think that. But I know I have been given this amazing ability, this amazing capacity, and I know that it wouldn't be weighing on my heart if it wasn't for me to do. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. And yes, did people laugh at Noah for building an ark? Of course they did.
Right.
That's not the point. Are they going to laugh at Cheryl for going, really? Jail? Gangs? You raise puppies. You wear fluffy boots. That's not a jail gang thing. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because crazy, arrogant, confident, all those things are merely energies that in the observation of somebody else may be something they criticize, but in your hands with a pure heart, all they are is the certainty that you are doing what you were intended to do, and that's it.
Yeah. And for me, that means if I heard God, I'm like, then that's what I need to do. Whatever it is. If it means taking in a gangster, if it means writing a book, none of them are things I would have chosen. They're just
If it
not.
means sitting under the lights with the camera on, grabbing the microphone.
Yes, exactly. If that's what it means, that's what it means.
There
If
you
it
go.
means taking a brainiac, I do not ever want to be a brainiac. It's not on my agenda. It's just,
I have no interest in being one either.
well, I don't want to be one. For me, my whole thing is step away from my mind and into the love of God and let Him transform me. That's a whole thing. So wouldn't have been my top choice for the morning, but you are a delight. And I'm very happy for the interesting pieces, because I never would have looked at alchemy as some of those things. I really wouldn't have. I would have been like, okay, so what is alchemy? And what I felt like God told me when He told me to write the book is I can transform a hard heart
Yep.
into a soft heart.
Yep.
I can transform someone, let's just say someone that is arrogant, into someone that's completely in union and goes, God, I can do nothing without you, but with you, I can do absolutely anything. There's nothing that I can't do. I'm positive of that with Him. But if I get out on my own, I'm thinking I might become the monkey. I don't want to be the monkey.
And the cool thing is, I think there are probably plenty of times when people have to go through the monkey phase,
I think they do.
just to go through the place where you can actually even get to the point of being
Yeah.
offensive
Yeah.
and still find out that even then, you're still connected.
No,
You're still accepted. You're
Yeah.
still embraced.
which is
And
healing.
that
That's
is
healing.
the story that you need to know, which is
That's
run
so
as
true.
far as you want. Try to get away
It's
as much
true.
as you want. And you will never escape the infinite love and connection that you are part of.
Yeah.
And if you can run from it, you can do anything you want, or you can fall into it, and then
Lean.
with that power,
Yeah.
have the
A whole
ability to
different
actually
world.
affect change.
Yep, it's so true. Dave has an uncle that was a horse whisperer. Was he an uncle? I think he was uncle. And he told him one time, Dave saw this horse bucking and carrying on, and it was out of control. And Dave thought, that thing is worthless. He said, no, it's just figuring out what all doesn't work.
Right.
Never stop a young stallion from finding out what all doesn't work. Let him find it out.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the place where God says, perfect love casts out all fear. To me, I'm just like, let him buck.
Yeah.
Who cares? They could buck until their back looks like it's going to break. God is love. He is kind. He is full of mercy. And anyone who chooses to go that alchemical pathway and say, I want union with you. You're everything. Why would I do anything without you? That's my journey. So that's what's exciting to me. So thank you for all you shared. You're a very wonderful friend, and I appreciate your alchemy insight. I would have never, ever dreamed those things were alchemy. I would be like, but that doesn't scare me. I mean, like, God is ultimate alchemist. That's what he told me.
There you go.
So for Jesus to be doing alchemy, not scary.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Bless you. Bless you, bless you.